You're nothing but a leech on society, and filth deserves to stay with filth, Cassian snarled, upending the heavy trash bin over her head. A wave of cold, rotting waste poured down, soaking through her hair and clothes, the stench clinging like a permanent stain. But he wasn't done. High on his own power, he drew back his hand and delivered a brutal slap that rang out sharp and cruel through the empty store. In that frozen moment, a shadow fell across him, dark, silent, and unbreakable. The person he had mocked as weak was no longer absent. A new force had arrived, one that carried the weight of real authority. His arrogance cracked in an instant. The game had changed forever, and the consequences were coming. How far would this protector go to restore what was taken? Stay until the end. This is the most brutal, satisfying payback you'll ever hear.
The air in Mr. Henderson's American history classroom carried the faint, lingering scent of stale chalk dust mingled with polished floor wax, a nostalgic aroma that, in most schools, might evoke images of enduring tradition and disciplined order. At Ashbourne Academy, however, that comforting illusion masked a far more sinister truth. The entire social order rested not on merit, intelligence, or hard work, but on bloodlines and raw intimidation. Cassian Vanderbilt held dominion over the center of the room like a young tyrant enthroned, his long legs stretched provocatively into the aisle, his varsity jacket draped with deliberate carelessness across the back of his chair, an unmistakable banner of his absolute immunity. As nephew to Principal Vanderbilt, the man who wielded iron control over the town's educational system like a private fiefdom, Cassian moved through the hallways with the swagger of someone who believed the very ground belonged to him by birthright. He possessed the polished, conventional handsomeness, blonde hair, chiseled jaw that seemed tailor-made for yearbook immortality, yet his eyes revealed only a cold, predatory void. In the dim back corner, barely noticed by anyone, sat Lyric Thorne. She had transferred to Ashbourne Academy just 3 days earlier, and to the rest of the class she was little more than a ghost. Her clothes were meticulously clean, but threadbare from endless cycles in the wash. The simple gray sweater she wore faded from years of service. Yet she carried herself with the rigid, unbreakable posture of a seasoned soldier, spine perfectly straight, hands folded with quiet precision on her desk. Lyric never slouched, never idly scrolled on a phone. She watched, she assessed, surviving this hostile maze of concrete corridors and slamming lockers with the wary instincts of someone who had long ago learned to navigate danger. Mr. Henderson, a man whose own posture had gradually bowed under decades of reluctant submission to unchecked authority, cleared his throat with visible weariness and tapped the blackboard where the date of the Declaration of Independence stood boldly written. "Can anyone tell me," he asked, his voice cracking just slightly under the strain, "what the primary grievance was that drove the colonies to this document? What truly served as the catalyst?" A tense silence gripped the room. Students fixed their gazes on shoes or distant windows, fully aware that no one spoke before the golden boy deigned to. Cassian let out an exaggerated yawn, then declared his answer without bothering to raise his hand, his voice ringing with lazy, unchallenged arrogance. "Taxes, obviously. They didn't want to pay for their tea. It's always been about money, just like today." He swept the room with a challenging stare, daring contradiction. A handful of fawning admirers in the front row chuckled on cue, nodding as if he had just imparted divine insight. "Excellent point, Cassian," he responded at once, relief washing visibly over his features. "Yes, taxation without representation was indeed." "Actually," a calm, melodic voice cut in, clear and unwavering, slicing through the heavy air like a honed blade through silk. Every head turned sharply. Lyric had not stood, yet in that moment her presence seemed to expand and dominate the shadowed corner. Looking solely at Mr. Henderson and ignoring Cassian completely, she continued evenly, "The grievance went far beyond mere money.
It was the fundamental assault on natural rights, the forced quartering of standing armies in peacetime, the systematic mockery of justice, the arbitrary dissolution of legitimate legislatures. Reducing the birth of a nation to a petty dispute over tea prices is to dishonor every life sacrificed for it. An oppressive, suffocating silence descended. Cassian twisted in his seat, the smug smirk vanishing as a tide of crimson anger rose from his neck. He was utterly unaccustomed to being challenged, least of all from someone whose clothes screamed poverty. At Ashbourne Academy, facts yielded to feelings, and Cassian's feelings reigned supreme. Mr. Henderson's face paled as he flicked anxious glances between them, mentally calculating the inevitable political repercussions. "That's quite a detailed addition, Lyric," he managed, voice trembling, "but perhaps we shouldn't get bogged down in semantics." "It's not semantics. It's history, and history demands the truth." Cassian's palm slammed down on his desk like a gunshot. "Cares," he snapped, voice dripping with contempt. "Think you're some genius because you memorized a textbook? You new here. You have no clue how things really work." The bell intervened just in time to prevent outright explosion, yet the tension refused to dissipate, hanging thick and dangerous in the air. Students shuffled out hurriedly, eager to escape the charge of discomfort, while Lyric gathered her belongings with slow, deliberate calm. Fear had no place in her. She had faced threats far graver than a spoiled heir in a varsity jacket. Still, she had yet to uncover the full depth of the rot embedded in these walls. She remained unaware that Cassian was failing multiple classes, or that his glowing report cards were carefully fabricated by teachers who valued their pensions far more than their principles. Cassian was nothing but a fraud, a hollow shell coated in gold leaf, and Lyric had just chipped away the first layer, exposing his mediocrity to his worshipful audience. For a narcissist like him, that exposure was an unforgivable transgression. As she approached the door, Cassian deliberately planted himself in her path, his broad frame looming like a barricade. He smelled of expensive cologne laced with raw aggression. Leaning in until his lips nearly grazed her ear, he whispered his poison for her alone. "You picked the wrong academy, and definitely the wrong person to humiliate. I run this place. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never learned to read." He pulled back, a cruel smirk twisting his features. "Welcome to Ashbourne." Lyric locked eyes with him, ancient, weary eyes that still burned with quiet, unquenchable fire. She said nothing. She simply stepped around him and walked into the hallway, leaving his ego seething in her wake. The war was declared, and at Ashbourne Academy, enemies fought without mercy or rules. The bell rang once more, signaling the end of first period, but to Lyric it resounded less like dismissal and more like the opening gong of a long, brutal fight.
Lyric stepped out of Mr. Henderson's classroom and into the crowded hallway, a pulsing vein of Ashbourne Academy, choked with surging teenagers, the relentless crash of metal locker doors, and the chaotic symphony of youthful voices. In any ordinary school, such clamor would fade into harmless background noise. Here, however, it was the unmistakable roar of a rigid hierarchy reasserting its iron grip. Word of the confrontation in history class had spread with ruthless speed, faster than any digital signal. Whispers followed Lyric like trailing shadows, malicious and unrelenting. She made her way toward her locker, clutching her binder tightly against her chest, gaze locked straight ahead. She could feel the stares, heavy, invasive, stripping her down to her faded clothes and outsider status, judging her very right to exist in their world. Cassian Vanderbilt was already holding court beside the sophomore lockers, lounging against the cold metal wall with arms folded and a smug smirk that implied he alone understood some cruel private joke, while everyone else remained blissfully ignorant. Flanking him stood his loyal enforcers, football players who lacked his sharp charisma but compensated with sheer size and unquestioning devotion. They formed an impenetrable barrier, the living wall that shielded their king.
"There she is," Cassian declared, his voice perfectly pitched to cut through the hallway din, "the genius historian." His circle erupted in sharp, rehearsed laughter. Lyric reached her locker and spun the combination dial with deliberate calm, refusing to give them the reaction they craved. She knew the cardinal rule when facing predators: never run, never flinch. But Cassian had no interest in a quiet victory. He demanded spectacle. "You know, guys," he continued, pushing off the wall and stepping into the center of the corridor, "I've figured it out. I know why she's always so angry. Withdrawal symptoms." A sudden hush rippled outward as nearby students slowed their steps, pretending to scroll on phones while eagerly eavesdropping. "My uncle saw her file," Cassian lied effortlessly, the falsehood rolling off his tongue like truth. "Her mom's a junkie, deep into the hard stuff. That's why they fled here, running from dealers." Lyric froze, fingers tightening on the icy locker handle. This wasn't just an attack on her. It was a dagger aimed at the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep their fragile family afloat. Slowly, Lyric turned, her expression a mask of barely contained fury. "Take that back!" Cassian's eyes gleamed with triumph as he stepped closer. "Or what, you gonna hit me? Where's your dad, Lyric? Oh wait, you don't have one. Did he bail when the money dried up, or does he even know you exist?" "My father is working," Lyric answered, voice steady even as her hands trembled. "He's serving his country. He's deployed." One of Cassian's lackeys snorted derisively. "Serving time, more like. That's the only duty people like him know." The cruelty landed like a precision strike, designed to shred her dignity. Lyric scanned the ring of faces, curiosity, amusement, and worst of all, from the silent bystanders desperate to reach their next class, a wave of palpable relief that the target was her and not them. Their inaction became the glue binding Cassian's lies together. She turned back to her locker, desperate to retrieve her books and escape. As her hand reached inside, a sudden brutal force rammed into her shoulder, a deliberate, violent check. Lyric staggered, balance shattered, and crashed hard onto the unforgiving linoleum. Her backpack skidded away. Heavy textbooks wrapped in brown paper spilled across the floor, pages fluttering open to reveal her precise, careful handwriting, now trampled under careless sneakers. "Oops," sneered one of the larger boys with a buzz cut, stepping deliberately over her legs as he laughed. "Watch where you're going, trash." Laughter exploded then, no longer confined to the inner circle, but spreading like wildfire through the hallway, infecting even those who had once stood neutral. Lyric sat among the chaos, hip throbbing from the impact, humiliation burning fierce and hot behind her eyes. For one fleeting moment, tears threatened, perfectly natural for any 16-year-old surrounded by hostility. But Lyric was much more than that. She was Colonel Ronan Thorne's daughter, forged in discipline and resilience. She forced the tears back, jaw clenched tight, and methodically began gathering her scattered belongings. A pair of expensive sneakers halted inches from her hand. Looking up, she met the gaze of a girl from chemistry class, a brief flash of sympathy there, the instinctive urge to help, but her eyes darted to Cassian, ever watchful, and fear won. She averted her gaze, stepped carefully around the scattered pencils, and hurried away. The message rang clear. Aiding Lyric was social suicide. Lyric rose, brushed off her pants, and hugged her books close like armor against her heart. She did not run. With measured, rhythmic steps, she walked to her next class, leaving the mocking echoes behind. Hours later, in the modest rental house, the air carried the sharp tang of antiseptic mingled with the gentle steam of boiled soup, a world apart from the school's venomous atmosphere. Here, everything felt fragile, precious. Lyric entered quietly, setting her keys softly in the bowl. "Lyric, is that you, baby?" came a frail, raspy voice from the living room. Isadora sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket despite the mild evening. Illness had stolen her weight, her strength, her color, but never her quiet warmth. Lyric forced the day's tension from her shoulders and painted on a flawless smile. "Hi, Mama," she said, bending to kiss her mother's forehead. Isadora's searching eyes studied her face. "How was it, the new school? Did you make friends? Are the teachers kind?" Memories of history class, the vicious lies about her father, the cold floor and trampling feet flooded back. But Lyric's voice emerged bright and convincing. "It was great, Mama. The school's beautiful. The teachers are sharp. I think I'm really going to like it here." Isadora exhaled in pure relief. "Thank God. I just want you happy, normal, while your dad's away." "I am happy," Lyric assured her. "Don't worry about me." She rose to prepare dinner. "I'll make some tea." As she turned, her sleeve shifted, revealing a fresh, ugly bruise glooming dark on her forearm. Lyric swiftly pulled the fabric down, hiding the evidence. Isadora, eyes closed in weary rest, accepted the comforting lie. She needed to believe it. Alone in the kitchen, Lyric stared at the kettle as water began to boil, her grip on the counter turning her knuckles bone white. She would shield this home at any cost. She would safeguard her mother's fragile peace. If that meant enduring Ashbourne Academy's daily poison without complaint, she would swallow it whole, day after day. By 8 p.m. that evening, the fluorescent lights of Mr. Garrick's Quick Stop hummed with the irritating low buzz of a weary insect. Outside, darkness pressed against the glass windows, transforming the small store into a brightly lit aquarium of artificial light and everyday commerce. Lyric stood at the counter of Mr. Garrick's Quick Stop, her gaze fixed not on the vibrant rows of candy or the glossy magazines touting celebrity gossip, but solely on the meager handful of coins and crumpled bills in her palm. She counted them a third time, as if willing the total to change, but the math remained merciless. "$7.95, Mr. Garrick said gently. He was a man, weathered like old leather, carrying the faint scent of tobacco and cedar from his worn vest, his cataract-clouded eyes holding the quiet understanding of someone who had long recognized the face of hard-won survival. He glanced at the generic pain relievers and the simple loaf of bread on the counter, then watched as Lyric carefully placed the exact change down. "Thank you, sir," she murmured. The electronic chime of the automatic door suddenly pierced the quiet, not with the soft welcome of an ordinary customer, but with the harsh intrusion of deliberate disruption. Outside, a high-performance SUV revved its engine unnecessarily loud before cutting off. Heavy boots thudded against the linoleum, and the air shifted, thick with the cloying mix of expensive cologne and lingering gasoline. Lyric didn't need to turn. She knew exactly who had entered. "Well, look at this," Cassian Vanderbilt's voice boomed, echoing off the shelves of canned goods. "The history professor shops at the beggar's market." She stiffened, fingers tightening around the bottle of medicine. Ignore him. Complete the mission. Return to base. Cassian strode straight to the counter, eyes locked on her alone, ignoring the shelves entirely. His grin was sharp, but never reached his eyes, a predator savoring the torment of cornered prey. He snatched the bottle from the counter, turning it mockingly in his hand. "Generic brand," he scoffed, "acetaminophen. What's wrong, Lyric? Mommy's withdrawal hitting hard? Need something to smooth out the shakes?" Mr. Garrick cleared his throat, joints creaking as he shifted uncomfortably. "Cassian, leave the girl alone. She's just buying a few things." Cassian's gaze snapped to the old man, his smile vanishing into cold menace. "I'm speaking to my classmate, Garrick. Unless you'd like my uncle to revisit the zoning permits for this place again, I suggest you stay out of it and count your pennies." The old shopkeeper wilted under the threat, eyes dropping to a stack of receipts he rearranged with trembling hands. In this town, the Vanderbilt name crushed age, service, and basic decency without effort. Lyric snatched the bottle back. "Don't touch my things." Cassian laughed, stepping invasively closer, towering over her and weaponizing every inch of his height. "Touchy," he mocked. You know, my family pays a fortune in taxes. It really bothers me that our money funds parasites like you, leeching off the system." He leaned in, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You show up in our town with those pathetic clothes and your junky mother acting like you're better than everyone. You're nothing, just a drain." The insult to Isadora ignited fire in Lyric's veins, every instinct screaming to lash out, to hurl the truth of her father's rank and her mother's illness like a grenade. But Colonel Ronan Thorne's voice echoed in her mind from a distant call months ago. "Discipline. Anger is fuel. Burn it all at once and you're left defenseless. Wait for the target to fully reveal himself." She steadied her breathing. Inhale. Exhale, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of fear or tears. She was no victim, she was a soldier deep in enemy territory, engaged in psychological warfare. "Are you finished?" she asked flatly, her voice stripped of the emotion he craved. Cassian blinked, momentarily thrown by her composure. He wanted tears, pleading, submission, anything to feed his ego. Finding none, he faltered. Lyric turned to leave, clutching the plastic bag until her knuckles whitened, eyes fixed on the glowing exit sign and the promise of freedom mere steps away. But Cassian moved faster, step-siding to block the doors, legs planted wide like a bouncer guarding an exclusive club she would never be allowed to enter. "I didn't say you could leave," he sneered. The air grew thick, the refrigerator hum fading into tense silence. From his pocket, he flicked a crumpled dollar bill and flicked it dismissively. It fluttered down, landing on the grimy floor beside her worn sneakers. "You dropped something," he said, voice thick with false generosity. "Pick it up. Buy yourself some dignity, or save it for your mom's next fix." Lyric stared at the bill, then lifted her gaze to meet his. Silence stretched between them, taut as a drawn wire on the verge of snapping. She did not bend. She did not stoop. With quiet, deliberate grace, she stepped over the money and over his petty attempt to degrade her. To Cassian Vanderbilt, her unyielding dignity was the ultimate insult, a direct challenge to the twisted hierarchy he believed was his birthright.
In Cassian Vanderbilt's twisted mind, he was the town's self-appointed benefactor, its merciless punisher, its unchallenged deity. And Lyric Thorne was merely an insignificant insect, one he hadn't yet decided to crush beneath his heel or entrap forever in a jar for his amusement. "You think you're better than that dollar?" he asked, his voice shedding its mocking lilt and sinking into something darker, far more menacing. He advanced, forcing Lyric to retreat step by step. With deliberate precision, he maneuvered her away from the illuminated counter and Mr. Garrick's fearful eyes, herding her into the narrow aisle lined with cleaning supplies and automotive fluids, the store's hidden blind spot, a place he knew intimately where indifferent security cameras could never reach. Her back struck the cold metal shelving, bottles of bleach rattled ominously behind her. She was cornered, windshield wiper fluid stacked to her left, solid wall to her right, and 6 feet of entitled malice looming directly ahead. "You don't get to walk away from me," Cassian hissed, slamming one palm against the shelf beside her head, caging her in completely. "You need to learn how the world really works, Lyric. It runs on power, and you have none." She clutched the plastic bag tighter, the sharp corners of the pill bottle biting into her palm like an anchor to reality. "Let me pass," she demanded, voice taut but unbroken. Cassian let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Or what? You'll run to the principal, my uncle, or call the police? Chief Morrow barbecues at our house every Sunday. No one's coming to save you." He leaned in closer, his breath stale with coffee as it invaded her space. "I've done my research. Your mom isn't just sick, is she? She's dependent. Section 8 housing pending. Disability checks that barely keep the lights on. You only exist here because we permit it."
Lyric's heart thundered against her ribs, yet her expression remained carved from stone. He wasn't striking at her body, he was dismantling the fragile system that shielded her vulnerable family. Principal Vanderbilt could end it all with a single call: lost housing applications, intrusive social services visits, questioning why a gravely ill woman raised a teenager in a freezing home, eviction by Friday, expulsion before her transfer papers were even processed. He let the threats hang, savoring their weight like a connoisseur. It was masterful psychological cruelty, designed not just to wound her, but to shatter the sanctuary she had fought to preserve for Isadora. "Beg," he whispered, voice dripping with sadistic delight. "Get on your knees and beg me to let you stay in my town." Something deep within Lyric shifted. The fluttering fear in her chest hardened into unyielding steel, the same unbreakable resolve that coursed through Colonel Ronan Thorne's blood, the kind that had earned him medals hidden away in a simple shoebox. She lifted her gaze, and for the first time, Cassian was no longer a looming threat. He was merely a target. "You are a small, sad boy," she said quietly, yet every word carried a resonance that made the air between them thrum. Cassian blinked, momentarily stunned. The script he had written in his head was unraveling. "You hide behind your uncle. You hide behind your money. You can bully me. You can spread lies about me. But hear me clearly, Cassian." She advanced half a step, forcing him to pull his arm back slightly. "You need to learn how the world really works, Lyric. It runs on power, and you have none." She clutched the plastic bag tighter, the sharp corners of the pill bottle biting into her palm like an anchor to reality. "Let me pass," she demanded, voice taut but unbroken. Cassian let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Or what? You'll run to the principal, my uncle? Or call the police? Chief Morrow barbecues at our house every Sunday. No one's coming to save you." He leaned in closer, his breath stale with coffee as it invaded her space. "I've done my research. Your mom isn't just sick, is she? She's dependent. Section 8 housing pending. Disability checks that barely keep the lights on. You only exist here because we permit it." Lyric's heart thundered against her ribs, yet her expression remained carved from stone. He wasn't striking at her body. He was dismantling the fragile system that shielded her vulnerable family. Principal Vanderbilt could end it all with a single call: lost housing applications, intrusive social services visits, questioning why a gravely ill woman raised a teenager in a freezing home, eviction by Friday, expulsion before her transfer papers were even processed. He let the threats hang, savoring their weight like a connoisseur. It was masterful psychological cruelty, designed not just to wound her, but to shatter the sanctuary she had fought to preserve for Isadora. "Beg," he whispered, voice dripping with sadistic delight. "Get on your knees and beg me to let you stay in my town." Something deep within Lyric shifted. The fluttering fear in her chest hardened into unyielding steel, the same unbreakable resolve that coursed through Colonel Ronan Thorne's blood, the kind that had earned him medals hidden away in a simple shoebox. She lifted her gaze, and for the first time, Cassian was no longer a looming threat. He was merely a target. "You are a small, sad boy," she said quietly, yet every word carried a resonance that made the air between them thrum. Cassian blinked, momentarily stunned. The script he had written in his head was unraveling. "You hide behind your uncle. You hide behind your money. You can bully me. You can spread lies about me. But hear me clearly, Cassian." She advanced half a step, forcing him to pull his arm back slightly. You need to learn how the world really works, Lyric. It runs on power, and you have none." It wasn't a teenage outburst. It was a soldier's vow, delivered with the cold precision of a sniper shot. For a split second, genuine fear flashed in Cassian's eyes. He glimpsed something ancient and lethal in her stare, a depth far beyond the petty cruelties of high school hallways. But his bloated, fragile ego couldn't accept terror. It twisted it instantly into rage. She had defied him. She had threatened him. "You think you can threaten me?" he roared, face contorting into a grotesque fury. Desperate for anything to reassert dominance, to grind her back into the dirt he believed was her place, his wild gaze landed on the large gray industrial trash can at the aisle's end, overflowing with damp coffee grounds, sticky wrappers, and the day's accumulated rot. "You think a storm?" He laughed, the sound fractured and unhinged. "I'll give you a storm." With manic strength, he seized the handle of the heavy, scarred cylinder that reeked of sour milk and decay.
Cassian Vanderbilt hoisted the heavy trash can with a surge of frenzied strength fueled by raw adrenaline and unchecked malice. He never paused, never glanced at the horrified elderly couple frozen near the freezers. In that moment, his vision narrowed to one target alone, Lyric Thorne, the girl who had dared to meet his gaze without flinching, who had refused to shatter under his onslaught. With a savage grunt, he raised the bin high above her head and let gravity unleash its vengeance. A torrent of putrid waste rained down upon her, a nauseating flood of cold coffee grounds, viscous soda residue, crumpled wrappers, and the nameless slimy filth that festered at the bottom of public bins. The rancid liquid soaked through her hair in an instant, streaming down her forehead to sting her eyes and weigh down her faded gray sweater until the fabric clung heavy and darkened. The wet, revolting sound of it all echoed through the aisle, punctuated by a half-empty slushy cup that ricocheted off her shoulder and burst across the floor. Cassian let the empty container crash to the linoleum with a hollow, resounding clatter, a triumphant drumbeat to his cruelty. Breathing hard, he wiped his hands on his jeans as if he were the one defiled. "That suits you better," he panted, voice thick with contempt. "Trash belongs with trash." A sudden flash of light sliced through the haze of humiliation. Lyric blinked through the grime clinging to her lashes and saw them. Two of Cassian's loyal shadows emerging from the aisles, phones held high, red recording lights winking like the eyes of circling predators. Their laughter rang out, not human, but the shrill, savage cackle of hyenas closing in on wounded prey. They weren't mere witnesses, they were curators of her degradation, eager to package her lowest moment for the entire school, the entire town to devour. The stench struck her next, an overwhelming assault of decay that clawed at her throat. Something deep inside Lyric fractured in that instant. The iron discipline she had forged, the stoic armor she had worn like a second skin, cracked beneath the unbearable weight of injustice. She was only 16, carrying the burden of a gravely ill mother, holding her fragile family together through sheer willpower alone. And this entitled, empty boy, who had never known true hardship, believed he could bury her in garbage and claimed victory. She wiped the sludge from her face with trembling hands, and when her eyes cleared, they no longer held calm restraint. They blazed with unbridled fury. "You are sick," she shouted, voice raw with rage rather than tears. Surging forward, she shoved him hard, palms slamming into his chest with force that staggered him back a full step. It was the first time anyone had ever laid hands on Cassian Vanderbilt in defiance. The hyena laughter from the phone-wielding boys died abruptly. The air itself seemed to vanish from the store. Cassian regained his balance, face draining of color before flooding violent crimson. The shock of physical rebellion short-circuited every certainty he had ever known. He reacted not with thought, but with primal bullying instinct. His arm drew back in a wide arc. The slap landed with a sharp, explosive crack that reverberated through the store like a gunshot. Mr. Garrick dropped his scanner in shock. The elderly woman by the freezers gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth.
The blow sent Lyric reeling sideways into a display of potato chips, bags exploding outward in a chaotic storm. Her cheek ignited as if seared by branding iron. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, mingling with the coffee grounds on her chin. Dazed, she clutched the shelf to steady herself as the world spun violently. Cassian towered over her, chest heaving, intoxicated by the rush of violence. In that moment, he felt invincible, godlike, gazing down at the girl huddled against the shelves, filthy, bleeding, broken. "Don't you ever touch me!" he screamed, voice shredding with fury. "You hear me? You are nothing. You are dirt!" But the rage still burned unsatisfied. One strike hadn't quenched the insecurity she had ignited. He craved finality, permanent submission. His hand rose again, this time balled into a fist, weight shifting forward to deliver a blow meant to shatter bone and etch an eternal reminder of her place. Lyric flinched, eyes squeezing shut as she braced for the impact. She waited for the crushing pain, but it never came. The store seemed to freeze, the air itself holding its breath. Cassian's fist halted inches from her face, suspended as if caught in an invisible vice. Confusion twisted his features. He strained to pull back, then to drive forward, but his arm remained locked in unyielding stone. Slowly, dread creeping in, he turned his head. A massive hand encircled his wrist, calloused, sun-scarred skin stretched over rooped veins like forged steel. A heavy black tactical watch marking the forearm of a man who had leapt from aircraft and endured the world's harshest crucibles. The grip was merciless, not the clumsy hold of a street fighter, but the precise dismantling clamp of someone intimately familiar with breaking bodies. Cassian looked up and up into the shadow of a towering figure that eclipsed the harsh fluorescent lights. The man wore a simple field jacket, yet carried it with an authority that rendered Cassian's varsity Linderman jacket childish in comparison. His face was etched with the hard lines of exhaustion and command, eyes dark and icy, fixed solely on the boy with predatory focus. Silence blanketed the store. Even the refrigerator seemed to hush in deference to the lethal aura radiating from him. Cassian's lips trembled as adrenaline ebbed, replaced by raw animal terror. The stranger spoke, no shout, no roar, only a low, resonant rumble, quiet yet infinitely more terrifying. "You have made a grave error, son."
The pressure was unrelenting, a vice of tempered steel grinding inexorably against the delicate bones of Cassian Vanderbilt's wrist. He jerked desperately to free himself, but the attempt was futile. For all his years as a high school athlete lording over terrified peers, he was now bound to an immovable force that regarded neither his varsity jacket nor the Vanderbilt name with anything but indifference. "Let go of me!" Cassian shrieked, panic clawing up his throat like acid. "Do you even know who I am? My uncle is the principal. My family owns half this town." Colonel Ronan Thorne did not so much as blink. His gaze remained locked on Cassian alone, ignoring the trembling boys clutching their phones and the terrified Mr. Garrick behind the counter. Dark eyes empty of mercy, radiating a quiet lethality honed across continents. "I do not care about your uncle," the colonel stated, his voice a deep, resonant growl laced with literal calm. "And I care even less for your father's money." In one fluid, practiced motion, he twisted the captured wrist. Cassian let out a high, splintered scream of pure agony as his legs buckled beneath him. To spare his arm from snapping outright, he crumpled to the filthy linoleum, kneeling in the scattered remnants of the garbage he had so gleefully unleashed moments before. Lyric, still braced against the shelf with coffee grounds dripping from her hair, stared through a veil of tears and grime at the unmistakable silhouette. She knew the breadth of those shoulders, the faint scent of rain and gun oil that clung to him. "Dad," she whispered, the word fragile yet luminous amid the violence.
Colonel Thorne's head snapped toward her. For the briefest instant, the warrior's mask slipped, revealing raw anguish at the sight of his daughter, bruised, bleeding, and coated in filth. That vulnerability vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an icy, unforgiving resolve. He turned back to Cassian. "You touched her," he said, the words not a question, but an accusation carved in stone. "You laid hands on my daughter." Realization crashed over Cassian like a physical blow. This was no random intervener, but the very father he had mocked as absent, worthless, a ghost. "She started it," Cassian stammered, voice shrinking to a pathetic whine. "She pushed me. I was only defending myself." The colonel's grip tightened. Cassian whimpered, cheek pressed to the cold floor. "I am Colonel Ronan Thorne, United States Marine Corps," he said, the title slicing through the lies like a scalpel. "For the past 18 months, I have hunted men who would skin you alive for amusement. Do not lie to me, boy. I watched everything." The rank hung heavy in the air. Behind the counter, Mr. Garrick straightened as much as his arthritic frame allowed, squinting past the glare of fluorescent lights. He recognized the stance, the precision of the hold, the coiled, lethal energy that only true combat veterans carried. Colonel Thorne released the wrist, but before Cassian could scramble away, the colonel seized him by the collar of his expensive jacket and hauled him upward with effortless strength, slamming him against the glass door of the beverage cooler. Bottles rattled violently inside. "You enjoy humiliation," the colonel said, voice low and close. "You enjoy making others feel small. Let me educate you on power, son. True power is not terrorizing a girl buying medicine for her sick mother. True power is restraint, and right now I am exercising every ounce I possess not to dismantle you piece by piece." Cassian's feet dangled inches above the floor. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with snot. The golden boy was utterly gone, reduced to a terrified child confronting a man who had stared death down and emerged unbroken. "Please," Cassian choked, voice breaking. "I'm sorry. Let me go." Colonel Thorne held him there for one long, agonizing moment, eyes burning with disgust, before releasing his grip. Cassian collapsed in a heap, gasping and clutching his bruised wrist, then scrambled backward in a frantic crab walk, eyes wide with trauma. "Get out of my sight," the colonel commanded, tone brooking no defiance. Cassian needed no further urging. He lurched to his feet and bolted for the door, shoving past his stunned friends. The two enablers, realizing their leader had been utterly humbled, lowered their phones and fled into the night, the bell above the door clanging wildly in their wake. Silence reclaimed the store. The colonel turned, and the fearsome warrior dissolved in an instant. In 2 long strides he reached Lyric. "Lyric," he murmured, voice cracking for the first time. She said nothing, only pushed herself from the shelf and threw herself into his arms, burying her face against his chest, heedless of the filth soaking her clothes and the throbbing pain in her cheek. Weeks of pent-up fear, loneliness, and exhaustion poured out in silent sobs. Colonel Thorne enveloped her completely, one hand cradling the back of her head as if shielding her from the entire world. The slime ruining his jacket meant nothing, only her safety mattered. "I've got you," he whispered into her matted hair. "I'm here. I'm home." From behind the counter came the sharp, unmistakable snap of heels clicking together. Lyric pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes, and glanced over her father's shoulder. Mr. Garrick stood as tall as his aged body allowed, chin high, hand raised in a crisp, unwavering salute. The old veteran recognized a brother in arms, the wolf who had entered his humble domain, and honored him accordingly. "Welcome home, Colonel," Mr. Garrick said, voice thick with reverence. Colonel Thorne met the old man's gaze and returned a solemn nod, a wordless bond between warriors. Then he looked down at his daughter, eyes hardening once more as he noted the blood on her split lip. "We have work to do, Lyric," he said quietly, steel returning to his tone. "No one does this to my family. No one."
Blue and red lights carved violent streaks through the darkened parking lot, casting the asphalt in a frantic, pulsing rhythm of authority and chaos. The siren died abruptly, yielding to the sharp crackle of a police radio and the heavy thud of slamming doors. Cassian Vanderbilt, who had been cowering beside the ice machine, suddenly rediscovered his bravado at the sight of the badge and the familiar, weathered face of Chief Morrow, a man who golfed with his uncle every Sunday without fail. "Chief, over here!" Cassian cried, sprinting toward the cruiser while cradling his wrist like a battle-scarred hero. "He's insane! He attacked me! He nearly shattered my arm!" Chief Morrow emerged from the vehicle, his uniform straining across a substantial midsection, wielding his authority more like a club than a shield. He surveyed the scene with the swift, biased judgment of long habit. A tearful boy from one of the town's most prominent families, a tall, imposing black man near the entrance, and a black girl still coated in filth. Tomorrow, the story wrote itself, no investigation required, only handcuffs. "Stay back, Cassian," he barked, hand drifting instinctively to his holster as he advanced on the store, his glare fixed on Colonel Ronan Thorne. "Hands where I can see them. Now!" Lyric flinched. The trauma of the past hour had stripped her nerves raw, and the mere sight of a holstered weapon sent fresh adrenaline surging through her. Colonel Thorne, however, did not flinch. He raised his hands slowly, palms open in calm compliance, yet the gesture carried unmistakable defiance. "I am complying, Chief," he said, voice steady and cutting cleanly through the humid night air, "but lower your voice." "Don't tell me how to do my job," Morrow roared, closing the distance aggressively. With a sharp metallic snick, he extended his baton. "On your knees. You're under arrest for assaulting a minor." From behind the cruiser, Cassian wailed dramatically. "He broke my wrist! Look at it! He's a maniac!" Morrow sneered. "Hear that? You're in serious trouble, pal. We don't tolerate thugs attacking our kids in this town." The colonel met the chief's eyes, first noting the baton, then Morrow himself. A heavy silence fell, more deafening than any siren. "I am reaching into my back pocket," Colonel Thorne announced clearly, broadcasting every movement. "I am retrieving my identification. Strike me, Chief, and you end your career mid-swing." Morrow hesitated. Something in the colonel's posture, the ramrod spine, the perfectly balanced stance, and the absolute absence of fear rang alarm bells in the deepest, most primitive part of his mind. This was no ordinary suspect. Slowly, deliberately, Colonel Thorne drew a black leather wallet, flipped it open, and held it beneath the strobing lights. The silver eagle of a full-bird colonel gleamed coldly beside military credentials that granted clearances far beyond anything Morrow had ever encountered outside films. The chief squinted, reading the name, the rank, Colonel Ronan Thorne, United States Marine Corps. Color drained from his face. The baton suddenly felt absurdly heavy in his grip. The thug he had been ready to subdue was a high-ranking officer. Morrow retracted the baton with a shaky click, clearing his throat as aggression dissolved into flustered panic. "Colonel, I didn't realize." "Clearly," Colonel Thorne replied, snapping the wallet shut. "Now, let's discuss what actually occurred. That boy poured garbage over my daughter and struck her in the face. I witnessed it. The store owner witnessed it. Video evidence exists." He stepped forward, forcing Morrow to retreat a pace. "Filed report immediately. Document every detail. This was no childish scuffle. It was assault. And given the racial slurs my daughter endured, flag it as a potential hate crime under federal statutes." Morrow swallowed hard, sweat beading despite the cool night. A federal hate crime probe meant FBI scrutiny, the kind that scorched small-town corruption to ash. "Look, Colonel," he stammered, "Cassian's a good kid. His uncle's the principal. Maybe we handle this quietly. No need to ruin a young man's future over a misunderstanding." Colonel Thorne glanced at Lyric, who was wiping sludge from your cheek, then fixed Morrow with eyes like forged steel.
My daughter is bleeding, Chief. There is no misunderstanding. You have two options. Arrest that boy now, or I contact the base provost marshal and state police for a very public discussion about why you refuse to detain a violent offender. Morrow's gaze flicked between Cassian and the colonel. He knew defeat when it stared him down. The Vanderbilt name carried weight, but the United States military carried power. He trudged back to the cruiser, where Cassian waited expectantly, still nursing his wrist and anticipating rescue. "Turn around, Cassian," Morrow said flatly. Cassian blinked, stunned. "What?" "Hands behind your back." "But Chief, it's me. Call my uncle." The metallic click-click of handcuffs with the most satisfying sound Lyric had ever heard. Morrow recited the Miranda rights as he guided a sobbing, bewildered Cassian into the back seat. The golden boy was caged. Colonel Thorne walked to Lyric, removing his field jacket and draping it gently over her shoulders to conceal the ruined sweater. "Let's go home, soldier," he said softly. As they moved toward his truck, Chief Morrow slumped into his cruiser, hands trembling on the wheel. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number burned into memory. Pick up, he muttered. The line connected. "Hello?" came Principal Vanderbilt's arrogant drawl. "Shut up and listen," Morrow hissed. "Get to the station now. Your nephew just assaulted the daughter of a Marine colonel."
There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "And Vanderbilt?" Chief Morrow added, eyes fixed on Colonel Ronan Thorne's truck as it disappeared into the night. "This man isn't just a soldier. He's a wolf, and he's coming for all of us." Principal Vanderbilt's office was a monument to self-aggrandizement. Dark mahogany bookshelves groaned under the weight of untouched encyclopedias, while a wide bay window framed the impeccably manicured lawn of Ashbourne Academy like a private kingdom. The air carried the sharp tang of lemon polish and the heavier scent of unearned power. Behind an imposing desk sat Principal Vanderbilt, fingers steepled with calculated composure. To his right was Mrs. Vanderbilt, Cassian's mother, a woman who armored herself in wealth, her genuine pearls gleaming coldly, her blonde hair lacquered into an unyielding helmet, her expression one of refined disgust, as though something foul had wafted into her pristine world. Across from them sat Lyric Thorne and Colonel Ronan Thorne. The contrast could not have been starker. Lyric wore a simple blouse, her cheeks still swollen and bruised violet from the assault. Beside her, the colonel was an immovable pillar. He had traded his field jacket for dress blues, the midnight fabric tailored to flawless precision. Rows of ribbons and medals weighing heavily across his chest. Silver Star, Purple Heart, campaign honors from distant sands and jungles. He sat ramrod straight at the position of attention, white cover resting on his knee. Principal Vanderbilt cleared his throat and shuffled papers, choosing to strike first. "Colonel Thorne," he began, voice slick with condescension, "we've thoroughly reviewed the incident. While we don't condone Cassian's behavior, we must consider the full context. Ashbourne Academy maintains a strict zero-tolerance policy for violence." He slid a single sheet across the desk, a suspension notice. "Illyric engaged in physical aggression by pushing another student. That constitutes assault. Therefore, both parties will serve a 3-day suspension to allow tempers to cool." Lyric gasped. "He poured garbage over me. I was only defending myself." "It takes two to tangle, young lady," Mrs. Vanderbilt cut in sharply, her tone brittle as thin ice. "My son is traumatized. He was arrested like some common thug because of your theatrics." Colonel Thorne remained silent, staring at the suspension notice as if mapping enemy territory. Mrs. Vanderbilt opened her designer handbag, withdrawing a checkbook and gold pen. The deliberate scratch of the pen filled the tense room. She tore out the check and slid it forward with a perfectly manicured nail. "We're reasonable people," she said, her sympathy as false and cloying as cheap perfume.
We understand your difficulties. Single income, military salary. This is $5,000. Consider it assistance for Lyric's needs and the inconvenience. In return, drop the charges and we'll overlook the suspension entirely. Cassian's record stays pristine for Harvard, and you receive a generous settlement. Everyone wins. The room fell deathly still, the air itself seeming to thicken. Lyric stared at the check, more money than Isadora saw in months. Rent was overdue, medicine was costly. Fear gripped her as she glanced at her father. Would he accept? Colonel Thorne studied the check, then Mrs. Vanderbilt, then the principal, whose smug smile betrayed his confidence that the deal was sealed. The colonel rose in one fluid, powerful motion, metals clinking softly, a quiet symphony of sacrifice and valor. He extended his hand, but instead of grasping the check, he swept it from the desk with a sharp backhand. It sailed through the air like a withered leaf and landed in the wastebasket. "You believe you can purchase my daughter's dignity?" he asked, voice low and resonant with controlled fury. "You think $5,000 compensates for honor?" Mrs. Vanderbilt recoiled as though struck. "How dare you? We're offering help." "You are attempting to bribe a federal officer," Colonel Thorne corrected, leaning forward to plant his knuckles on the mahogany. "I have commanded men who gave their lives for less than you spend on footwear. I want neither your money nor your pity. I want justice." "You're making a grave error," Principal Vanderbilt warned, color rising in his face. "Push this and I'll expel her. I'll ensure she never graduates in this state. You're challenging the system, Colonel. You cannot prevail." The colonel allowed a cold, predatory smile. "The system? You mistake yourself for it." He withdrew his phone from his uniform pocket, dialed and activated speaker. "This is Colonel Thorne. Activate JAG support. I need a legal team at Ashbourne Academy immediately. Title VI civil rights violation, attempted bribery of a federal officer, systemic administrative corruption." A crisp voice responded. "Copy that, Colonel. ETA 30 minutes. He ended the call and regarded the principal's ashen, trembling faces. "My lawyers are en route," Colonel Thorne said, glancing at his watch. "I highly recommend you begin printing your emails. You'll need them." The Patriot's Diner perched on the town's fringe, a weathered remnant of simpler times, where chrome counters and vinyl booths provided quiet refuge for those who labored for a living. It was neutral territory, sacred and unspoken.
The air in the Patriot's Diner carried the rich, comforting scent of frying bacon, mingled with the faint, stubborn trace of cigarette smoke that had seeped into the ceiling tiles over decades, a lingering reminder of simpler times when such places were havens for quiet conversation and strong coffee. Lyric Thorne sat alone in a corner booth, her back pressed firmly against the wall for a clear view of the entrance, eyes locked on the door with the patient vigilance her father had taught her. Colonel Ronan Thorne waited outside in the truck, silently maintaining a protective perimeter. He had insisted on sweeping the area first, assessing every shadow and parked car, but Lyric had quietly stood her ground. This meeting was hers to handle alone, a line she needed to draw. The anonymous message on social media had been precise and urgent. "Come alone. I have what you need." She had read it multiple times, weighing the risk against the promise it held. The bell above the door jingled softly, announcing a newcomer. A young man stepped inside, hooded sweatshirt pulled low to shroud his features in shadow, moving with the skittish tension of someone long accustomed to expecting sudden blows. His eyes darted nervously across the room, from the lone waitress wiping down the counter to the scattered patrons hunched protectively over their mugs, before finally settling on Lyric. He approached with hurried caution, sliding into the booth opposite her and keeping his hands buried deep in his pockets as if ready to bolt at the slightest threat. "You are Lyric," he whispered, voice barely rising above the low hum of the diner. "I am," she replied evenly, her posture relaxed yet primed for anything. "And you are the one who messaged me, Ghost of Ashbourne?"
Slowly he lowered his hood, revealing a face still young but carved with lines of exhaustion far beyond his years, a jagged scar slicing through his left eyebrow like a permanent reminder of battles lost. "My name is Kieran," he said, the words heavy with old pain. 2 years ago, I sat exactly where Cassian Vanderbilt sits now, king of the school, captain of the debate team, full scholarship to Stanford already secured. Lyric leaned forward slightly, voice soft but direct. "What happened?" Kieran let out a bitter, fractured laugh that held no humor, only the echo of deep betrayal. "Cassian happened. I discovered he was cheating on the SATs, had the full answer key. I thought doing the right thing meant something, so I took it straight to Principal Vanderbilt." His eyes widened, haunted by the memory. "He didn't thank me. He destroyed me. Within days, drugs mysteriously appeared in my locker, planted, obviously, but who believes the scholarship kid when the Vanderbilt name speaks? They expelled me on the spot. My Stanford offer vanished overnight. My family had to sell our house and move 2 towns away just to escape the constant harassment. We lost everything: home, future, peace." Lyric listened without interruption, a cold, unyielding hardness settling in her chest as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't random cruelty or a broken system. It was deliberate design, engineered to protect the golden children with the right surnames and bottomless bank accounts, while sacrificing everyone else to the wolves. "Why come forward now?" she asked quietly, searching his face. Kieran's gaze met hers, steady for the first time. "Because I saw the video. Cassian dumping trash on you, then your father standing unflinching against the police. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like the villains might actually lose." His hand emerged from his pocket, trembling slightly as he produced a small silver USB drive. He placed it on the table and covered it protectively, as though it could explode at any moment. "I didn't just disappear," he confessed in a rush. "Before they forced me out, I copied files from the server and recorded conversations whenever I could." Lyric stared at the drive, sensing its weight. "What's on it?" she whispered. "Evidence," Kieran whispered fiercely. "Cassian doesn't bully for fun. He runs a calculated ring. Hidden cameras in locker rooms, bathrooms, parties. He blackmails students into doing his homework, paying him off, or staying silent forever. And the principal is implicated too. Emails plotting to bury my case, recorded talks about paying off Chief Morrow to look the other way. It's all there." A sharp chill traced down Lyric's spine. This was no longer mere high school malice, but a full criminal enterprise cloaked in privilege. "I was too terrified to use it," Kieran admitted, voice cracking. "I thought they'd finish me off for good." He slid the drive across the scarred tabletop. "But your father, he looks like a man who stares down death and doesn't blink. Give this to him. Burn them all down." Abruptly he stood, pulling his hood back up and retreating into his shell of anonymity. "Don't ever say it came from me. I can't survive that nightmare again." Before Lyric could offer thanks or reassurance, he was gone, slipping through the door and melting into the gray afternoon light. She lifted the cold metal drive. In her palm it felt impossibly heavy, carrying the collective fate of every student trapped at Ashbourne Academy. Outside, the wind whipped up sharply, dark clouds gathering on the horizon like an approaching storm front. Lyric stepped from the diner and climbed into the truck's passenger seat. Colonel Ronan Thorne glanced over immediately, reading the fierce determination blazing in her eyes and the drive clenched tightly in her fist. "Did he show?" he asked, voice low and steady. She held it up. Sunlight struck the metal, flashing like a loaded silver bullet. "He showed," she replied, her tone calm yet edged with lethal intent. "He gave us the map to the bodies." A grim, shared smile touched her lips as she met her father's unflinching gaze. "We have enough ammunition to dismantle the principal's entire empire. Dad, it's time to go to war."
The drab conference room of the local Motel 6 had been swiftly transformed into a forward operating base, black cables snaking across the worn carpet to connect a bank of secure laptops humming with the formidable processing power of the United States military's legal division, screens glowing with encrypted data, ready for battle.
Colonel Ronan Thorne stood by the window, peering through the slatted blinds at the rain-slicked parking lot. Every shadow outside weighed and measured by eyes trained to detect threats long before they materialized. Inside the dimly lit room, Major Steele, the JAG officer, whose gaze cut as sharply as broken glass, hammered at the keyboard with relentless focus. On the glowing screens, the contents of Kieran's USB drive were being methodically dissected, cross-referenced, and forged into weapons of unassailable fact. "Colonel," Steele said, his voice slicing cleanly through the low hum of cooling fans and spinning drives, "you need to see this." Thorne turned and crossed the room in 3 measured strides, leaning over Steele's shoulder to study the display. What appeared to the untrained eye as a dull spreadsheet of numbers was, to a man who had spent years tracing insurgent funding networks through war zones, a blazing trail of guilt. "We cracked Principal Vanderbilt's encrypted ledger," Steele explained, tracing a highlighted line with precision. "He wasn't merely shielding bullying, sure. He was operating a private slush fund." Thorne's eyes narrowed at the figures. "Sources?" "2 primary channels," Steele replied, tone darkening. "First, the Ashbourne Opportunity Grant, federal dollars earmarked for textbooks and meals for low-income students. He's diverted 40% over the past 3 years. Lyric, seated quietly in the corner with a cup of cooling tea, looked up sharply. "That's why our history books still treat the Soviet Union as a going concern," she said bitterly. "That's why the cafeteria runs dry before second lunch." "It gets worse," Steele continued, opening another tab. "The second account is the Veterans Memorial Maintenance Fund, a local charity intended to preserve the town's war memorial and cover medical co-pays for disabled veterans." The air in the room seemed to plummet in temperature. Thorne froze, jaw tightening. "He stole from veterans?" "Drained it completely, sir. Look at this outgoing transfer. $55,000 wired last month to a luxury dealership downtown." Steele pulled up the scanned invoice, a brand-new lifted black Ford Raptor, custom license plate reading GLD Boy. "Cassian's truck," Lyric whispered, voice laced with disgust. "He parades it through the school lot every day, bragging that his father bought it as a reward for his grades." Thorne's response was a low, dangerous growl that seemed to vibrate through his chest. "His father didn't buy it. The widows of fallen soldiers did. The children eating half portions did. This isn't simple theft. It's a moral abomination. Principal Vanderbilt took money meant to honor the dead and feed the hungry and handed his vicious nephew a trophy." Major Steele closed the laptop with finality. "Federal felony charges, sir. Embezzlement of government funds, wire fraud, theft by deception. The bullying case is merely the surface. We have enough here to lock Vanderbilt away for 20 years. Colonel Thorne straightened his uniform, exhaustion falling away like shed armor, replaced by the cold, crystalline focus of a commander preparing to end a campaign. He moved to the center of the room, every inch the leader, issuing orders that would not be questioned. "Prepare the paperwork," he commanded. "Bring in the FBI, but we serve them first. I want them to know the end has come before the cuffs even touch skin." Steele met his gaze. "When do we strike?" Thorne glanced at the wall calendar, a single date circled in red. "Tonight." Lyric mentioned a party. She nodded, eyes hard. "Cassian's 17th birthday at the Vanderbilt estate. Half the school will be there. They're calling it the event of the year." "Good," Thorne said, a grim edge to his voice. "Then we'll deliver a gift they will never forget." High on the hill overlooking the town, the Vanderbilt estate blazed with ostentatious light, luxury cars lining the long driveway like trophies on display.
bass-heavy music pounded through the night, rattling windows of neighbors too intimidated to protest. In the backyard beside the heated pool, Cassian held court, flushed with cheap beer and the intoxicating rush of unchallenged adoration. He stood atop a table, laughing as his followers cheered, the recent suspension doing nothing to humble him, only fueling his arrogance. In his mind, he had already won. His family had buried the problem, as they always did. "To the untouchables!" he roared, raising a red solo cup. "To Cassian!" the crowd echoed back. The music thrummed louder, laughter wilder. No one noticed the dark sedan easing up the gravel drive, or the man in the plain suit who bypassed the security guard with a single legal document that drained the color from the man's face. Then, abruptly, the music died. Silence swept outward like a shockwave. Confused faces turned. Cassian swayed on his table, frowning. "Hey, who killed the vibe? Turn it back on." "Cassian Vanderbilt." The voice rang clear from the patio's edge. A process server, weary-faced in a modest suit, stepped into the pool lights, thick envelope in hand. Cassian laughed drunkenly. "What are you, the stripper?" The man did not smile. He approached the table and tossed the envelope at Cassian's feet. "You have been served," he announced clearly, ensuring every guest heard. "And your uncle, Principal Vanderbilt, the FBI is executing a search warrant at his residence right now." Cassian stared down at the envelope, bold lettering unmistakable, "Sabina, Federal District Court." "Happy birthday, kid," the server said, already turning away. "Enjoy the cake. It might be the last decent meal you have for a long time."
The video extracted from one of Cassian Vanderbilt's fawning followers never remained buried. Whether Kieran uploaded it in a surge of long-suppressed vengeance or some other student, finally sickened beyond endurance, found the courage to act, the source was irrelevant. What mattered was the explosion that followed, a digital detonation of unprecedented force. It began quietly on a local community forum, then leaped to regional news outlets with ferocious speed. By morning, the clip, titled "Privileged Bully Dumps Trash on Marine Colonel's Daughter," had surged past 3 million views. The footage was grainy, phone-shot, and unsteady, but the cruelty it captured was razor-sharp and undeniable. The world watched Cassian in his varsity jacket, his sneer twisting his features as the trash cascaded over Lyric Thorn, heard the sickening crack of his open-handed slap, and worst of all, listened to his mocking laughter echoing through the store. Cassian had assumed the video would cement his dominance at Ashbourne Academy, that his peers would cheer along with him. He had fatally miscalculated. The internet bowed to no uncle's influence, respected no local permits or family wealth. The comment sections did not echo with amusement. They burned with raw, unfiltered outrage. "Find this kid. My father was a Marine. If I witnessed this, I'd end him myself. This is what happens when money silences justice. Make him famous, the wrong kind." The fury spilled from screens into the real world. At 8 sharp, Principal Vanderbilt glanced at his office window and let his coffee mug slip from numb fingers. It shattered on the expensive rug, dark liquid spreading like blood, but he scarcely noticed. Beyond the school gates, a solemn formation had assembled. Not a chaotic mob of teenagers, but something infinitely more formidable. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter had turned out in force, 50 men and women, most well past 70, standing in a silent, unbreakable line that blocked the administration building entrance. They wore faded garrison caps and old field jackets heavy with history. Some leaned on canes, others sat in wheelchairs, yet their eyes gleamed with sharpened steel, and their resolve was unyielding. Hand-painted cardboard signs rose above them, messages stark and devastating. "She is our daughter too. Bullying is cowardice. Honor the code." A local news van screeched to a halt nearby. A reporter thrust a microphone toward Mr. Garrett, the convenience store owner who stood front and center, his Vietnam service medal proudly displayed. "Mr. Garrett, why are you here today?" The old veteran stared straight into the camera, voice steady as granite. "We fought for a nation where the strong protect the weak. This Vanderbilt boy believes he's tough because he assaults a young girl. He thinks he's royalty. Today, we remind him and everyone
that in America, respect is earned through character, not purchased, and you do not earn it by tormenting the child of a deployed Marine. Inside the Vanderbilt mansion, heavy curtains sealed out the world. Cassian sat huddled on the couch beneath a blanket, staring blankly at his phone as notifications flooded in, a relentless storm of threats and condemnation. His once glorious Instagram had become a tomb of vicious comments. He had deleted the app, but the phantom buzz of public hatred still vibrated in his pocket. His mother screamed at her publicist from the kitchen landline, while his father barricaded himself with lawyers. Cassian was utterly alone. The silence shattered with the ring of his personal phone. The caller ID showed a familiar area code, the admissions office of the elite state university that had extended him a full athletic scholarship mere weeks ago. A flicker of desperate hope sparked in his chest. Perhaps they hadn't seen it. Perhaps this was routine confirmation. He answered quickly. "Hello, this is Cassian." The woman's voice on the line was colder than ice. "This is Dean Evans from the athletic department." "Hi, Dean Evans. I was just about to send my acceptance." "Do not bother," she interrupted flatly. Cassian froze. "We have seen the video, Mr. Vanderbilt. The university demands a standard of conduct from its athletes. Your actions in that footage are repugnant, everything we stand against." "It was out of context," he stammered, excuses tasting like ash. "Just a joke. My uncle can explain." "Your uncle has no authority here," she stated with finality. "We are rescinding your scholarship offer effective immediately and flagging your file across the collegiate database. You will not play for us. You will not play for anyone." "You can't do this, Miss Cassian," he screamed, tears spilling over. "I'm the quarterback. I'm the golden boy." "You are a liability, and frankly, son, you are a disgrace." The line went dead. Cassian lowered the phone, the crushing silence rushing back, absolute and suffocating. The golden boy had not merely tarnished, he had melted down entirely and revealed as worthless. The rain hammered relentlessly against the tin roof of the small rental house, a rhythmic drumming that usually lulled Isadora to sleep.
Tonight, the rain's steady drum against the tin roof offered no comfort, no lullaby for sleep. Tonight, the true storm stood on the front porch, demanding entry. Lyric Thorne opened the door to confront Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt beneath the sputtering yellow light, their appearance jarringly out of place, like aristocrats who had strayed into humble, unforgiving territory. Mrs. Vanderbilt's trench coat, luxurious and impeccably tailored, likely cost more than the Thorne family car, yet her face had gone pale beneath smudged mascara, the first cracks in her composed facade. Mr. Vanderbilt stood just behind her, clutching a dripping umbrella with white-knuckled grip, his jaw set in a line of desperate determination. "We must speak with your mother," Mrs. Vanderbilt announced, the words falling like a command rather than a request. Lyric held her ground in the doorway. "She's resting. She's ill." "This cannot wait," Mr. Vanderbilt pressed, stepping closer. "It affects the future of everyone in this house." From the living room drifted a voice, faint but resolute. "Let them in, Lyric." After a heartbeat of hesitation, Lyric moved aside. The Vanderbilts crossed the threshold, trailing the chill scent of rain-soaked wool and barely concealed desperation into the warm, medicinal stillness of the home. Their gazes swept the modest space with thinly veiled contempt, the faded wallpaper curling at the edges, the second-hand sofa sagging under years of faithful service, every detail an unspoken indictment of poverty. Isadora sat wrapped in her quilt in the old armchair, her breathing shallow and measured, the toll of chemotherapy evident in her fragile frame and bare scalp. Yet the illness had not touched the sharp, unwavering intelligence that gleamed in her eyes. Mrs. Vanderbilt wasted no time on pleasantries. She lowered herself to the sofa's edge, leaning forward with hands clasped in a carefully rehearsed display of shared maternal anguish. "Isadora, may I call you Isadora?" she began, voice trembling with artful emotion. "I come to you simply as one mother to another. I know you're suffering. I know the crushing weight of raising a child when the world seems determined to break you." Isadora regarded her without a word, gaze steady and unyielding. My Cassian made a grievous error, Mrs. Vanderbilt pressed on, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. He's a high-spirited boy carrying immense pressure, but deep down he is good. If he faces prison, a permanent record, his entire life will be ruined. He's still just a child, Isadora. As a mother, surely you understand the meaning of mercy. Mr. Vanderbilt assumed the colder role. We're aware of your circumstances, the mounting medical bills, the daily struggles. We can ease that burden. A private fund, better housing, real security. All it requires is a signed letter of non-prosecution, a simple statement to authorities that it was all a misunderstanding. It was a meticulously coordinated assault, one wielding feigned compassion, the other dangling material salvation, designed to purchase her integrity while she was at the most vulnerable. From the kitchen doorway, Lyric felt her nails dig painfully into her palms, fury urging her to shout, to physically drive them out. But Isadora raised a trembling hand. "Help me up." "Mama, please, no, you don't have to stand," Lyric protested, hurrying to his side. "I said, help me up." With Lyric's steadying arm, Isadora rose, swaying for only a moment before locking her knees and drawing herself to full defiant height, her slight figure suddenly casting a long, imposing shadow over the seated couple. "You dare enter my home," Isadora said, her voice quiet yet laced with such unshakable authority that it seemed to strip the very paint from the walls. "You survey my belongings, my daughter, and presume we are commodities to be bought?" Mrs. Vanderbilt opened her mouth, startled. "No, we only meant you plead for your son's future," Isadora cut in, unrelenting. "What of my daughter's dignity? Your son degraded her, poured filth over her as if she were nothing, and now you arrive here treating me like some pauper to be bribed?" She took another step forward, releasing Lyric's support to stand entirely on her own. "My body may be weakened, Mrs. Vanderbilt, but my soul is not for sale, and my daughter is not trash to be discarded." Her thin finger trembling yet resolute pointed toward the door. "Leave! Take your money and your insincere tears. From this family you will receive only the justice you have earned." Mr. Vanderbilt shot to his feet, face reddening with outrage. "This is a monumental mistake. You have no idea who you're defying." Isadora's eyes blazed with quiet fire. "I know precisely who you are. People who believe wealth can substitute for morality. Now get out of my house before my husband returns. He possesses far less patience than I do." The sheer moral force in the room became almost tangible, propelling the Vanderbilts backward as if physically pushed. They scrambled for the door, retreating into the downpour, their costly coats offering no defense against the searing shame of rejection. From the shadowed back seat of the family Mercedes, Cassian watched his parents flee the porch, his father slamming the car door with explosive curses, his mother collapsing into genuine tears, not for her son's fate, but for the public humiliation she had endured. "Ungrateful trash," his father bellowed, pounding the steering wheel. "This will destroy everything. The campaign, the investments, our standing at the club." Cassian remained frozen in the plush leather, absorbing every word as they raged the finances, reputation, social fallout. Not once did they utter his name. Not once did they inquire if he was frightened or remorseful. A chilling clarity washed over him. They did not fear his imprisonment. They feared the embarrassment he now represented. He was not their beloved son. He was merely a depreciated asset. For the first time in his golden existence, the golden boy confronted true isolation, the walls of his world closing in with cold, inexorable finality. The interrogation room at the Federal Building was purposefully engineered to dismantle even the strongest ego, a featureless gray concrete box bathed in the harsh flickering glow of a single fluorescent light that cast long, jaundiced shadows across the unforgiving walls.
The interrogation room at the Federal Building was a merciless construct, devoid of windows or any hint of outside air. Nothing to soften the isolation but a cold steel table anchored to the floor, 3 hard chairs, and a two-way mirror that reflected back like a cold, unblinking eye judging every flicker of weakness. Cassian Vanderbilt sat shackled to the table, his once symbolic varsity jacket now draped loosely over slumped shoulders, damped with nervous sweat and stained by the intangible filth of dread. The swagger that had defined his tyranny at Ashbourne Academy had evaporated completely, exposing only a frightened, diminished boy who had finally grasped that the rules no longer bent to his family's will. Opposite him sat Special Agent Voss, a stark contrast to the complacent local chief. No protruding belly, no hint of susceptibility to country club favors. His charcoal suit spoke of precision and expense far beyond Cassian's flashy truck, and his eyes held absolutely no warmth or negotiable sympathy. Beside Cassian, the family attorney, Mr. Sterling, continually wiped perspiration from his brow, a man far more comfortable erasing minor infractions than confronting the unrelenting machinery of the Department of Justice. "My client has nothing further to say," Sterling stated, though the declaration rang hollow and uncertain. "We are finished here." Agent Voss paid the lawyer no mind. He opened a thick manila folder and deliberately slid a single photograph across the gleaming metal surface. It showed a federal prison cell, cramped, sterile, and utterly hopeless under harsh light. "This is ADX Florence," Voss remarked, his tone deceptively conversational, almost casual. "Supermax. If you're convicted on federal hate crimes and wire fraud charges, this is where your 20s will disappear, Cassian. No more football fields, no parties, no access to daddy's inheritance, just 23 hours a day locked in concrete solitude." Cassian's throat constricted as he stared at the image, mouth parched and words failing him. Voss leaned in slightly, voice still measured. "Or you can choose a different path. We know you didn't engineer the embezzlement scheme. You're simply a spoiled kid who enjoys spending other people's money. We know exactly who the mastermind is." "Cassian, not one word," Sterling hissed urgently. "Your father was very clear." "My father isn't sitting here in chains," Cassian exploded, the shout rebounding sharply off bare walls. He rounded on the lawyer, eyes wild with mounting panic. "He's at home obsessing over market fluctuations. My mother's probably weeping over lost dinner invitations. I'm the one facing actual prison." He whipped his gaze back to Voss, desperation cracking his voice. "What do you want from me?" Voss allowed the faintest, shark-like smile. "I want the principal. I want Principal Vanderbilt." Cassian swallowed convulsively, glancing toward the mirror and seeing only his own haunted reflection, the darkening bruises on his wrist from Colonel Ronan Thorne's vice-like grip, the wreckage of a life he had assumed untouchable, the brittle loyalty he had nursed toward his family, a loyalty never genuinely reciprocated, fractured irreparably. "He told me to do it," Cassian whispered at first. "Louder," Voss commanded. "My uncle," Cassian repeated, bitterness now fueling volume. "My uncle explicitly ordered me to target Lyric, to break her completely." "Why her in particular?" Voss pressed, unrelenting. Cassian dropped his gaze to his cuffed hands. "Because of her father. Because she's military family." The confession tumbled out like long-dammed poison. "Uncle Vanderbilt despises anyone in uniform. During the Gulf War, my dad stayed stateside to manage the business, while Uncle drew a draft number. He never served, used grandfather's connections to buy a fraudulent medical exemption, and spent 2 years hiding in Europe while his peers fought and died in the desert." Cassian's eyes lifted, hardened by years of absorbed resentment. "He calls soldiers government dogs, claims they're idiots dying for nothing. When Lyric transferred in and he discovered her father was a full colonel, it aided him. He felt exposed, diminished, like the coward he truly is. So he decided to punish the colonel by destroying his daughter."
The room fell into heavy silence, the revelation lingering like smoke, a small festering envy that had grown into calculated terror. "He even gave me her locker combination," Cassian whispered now, controlling his voice and bearing every ounce of guilt. "He told me to sabotage her history grades. He promised if I got her expelled, he'd buy me the truck. It was all his plan. I was only following orders." It was history's most threadbare and pathetic defense. Agent Voss rose smoothly, collecting the file. "Thank you, Cassian. You've just earned yourself a plea deal and entombed your uncle." He moved to the door, opened it, and addressed the uniformed officers waiting outside. "Assemble the tactical team. Probable cause established. We're taking down the school." 30 minutes later, Ashbourne Academy's tranquil morning routine shattered irreparably. A distant wail swelled into a discordant symphony of sirens that flooded the whole valley. Then the convoy thundered into view, 6 black SUVs leading 4 marked cruisers, tires screaming as they vaulted curbs and sealed every exit before the administration building. Students pressed against classroom windows in stunned disbelief. Teachers stood frozen, chalk slipping from lifeless fingers. Doors burst open as FBI agents in blue windbreakers stormed the steps with chilling, synchronized precision, assault rifles slung and battering rams poised. Inside his sanctuary of power, Principal Vanderbilt sat behind the mahogany desk, frantically feeding documents into a whining shredder, clinging to the delusion that time remained, that family attorneys could still deflect the inevitable. He was profoundly wrong. The heavy oak doors did not open. They detonated inward with a concussive boom. "Federal agents down on the ground!" The command thundered through the office. Vanderbilt lurched backward in panic, tripping over his luxurious leather chair and scrabbling away like a vermin suddenly flooded with light. Agents poured in, red laser sights tracing erratic patterns across his chest. "Principal Vanderbilt, you are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit hate crimes." Hands trembling violently, he raised them in surrender. "This is impossible. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I'm the principal here." "Not anymore," the agent replied icily, yanking him upright by the suit collar and slamming him against the wall beside his proudly displayed degrees. The handcuffs locked with a sharp, final click, cold, tight, and irreversible. Outside, the entire student body crowded windows in hushed awe, watching the man who'd long lorded over them, shielded predators, and silenced the vulnerable, being hauled away in chains like any common criminal. In the parking lot, Colonel Ronan Thorne stood beside his truck, arms folded, expression carved from granite, yet edged with grim satisfaction. He offered no triumphant smile, only silent witness as the architect of so much corruption finally crumbled. The war for Ashbourne Academy was over. The long occupation had ended.
The gallery was filled to capacity, tension thick in the air. Veterans from the local VFW chapter occupied the back rows, garrison caps resting solemnly on their knees, their weathered faces etched with grim anticipation and quiet resolve. Across the aisle sat the remnants of the town's elite, social climbers who had spent years currying favor with the Vanderbilt family, now watching the dynasty's collapse with a blend of dread and barely concealed fascination. Casey and Vanderbilt sat at the defense table, stripped of his varsity jacket and clad instead in an ill-fitting gray suit that made him appear younger, smaller, almost fragile. He no longer resembled a king. He looked like a frightened child awaiting punishment for a catastrophe he could no longer deny. Behind him, his parents offered no solace, too engrossed in hushed, urgent consultations with their team of high-priced advisors, desperately attempting to salvage what remained of their social standing from the ruins their son had created. Judge Hawthorne presided from the bench, a man of 70, with features hewn from granite and eyes that had witnessed every shade of human deceit. He appeared utterly unimpressed by the defense team's expensive attire. If anything, he looked weary, and that quiet boredom carried more menace than any outburst. Mr. Sterling, Cassian's lead attorney, rose with practiced grace, adjusting his silk tie before approaching the jury box, moving with the polished ease of someone whose career revolved around selling carefully crafted deceptions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sterling began, voice rich with manufactured compassion, "we're not here to deny that an unfortunate incident took place. We are here to understand why Cassian Vanderbilt is not a villain, but a victim of relentless pressure to achieve perfection, a victim of an uncle who manipulated an impressionable young mind into waging a proxy war against an imagined adversary." He paced deliberately, gesturing toward Cassian, who kept his head bowed in feigned contrition. "This boy suffers from acute performance anxiety, crushed beneath impossible expectations. His actions, though misguided, were a cry for help. To impose the full weight of the law would destroy a promising future over a single lapse in judgment. We ask for leniency, for understanding, to see the child beneath the monster the media has fabricated." The jury, composed largely of retirees and working-class locals who had endured wars, economic hardship, and honest labor, listened in stoic silence, faces betraying no sympathy. The notion that privilege and pressure excused assault landed like lead among them. Then the prosecution rose. "The people call Lyric Thorne to the stand." Lyric stood calmly, dressed in a simple navy dress, hair pulled back neatly. As she walked to the witness box, a profound hush settled over the courtroom. She passed Cassian without a glance, ascended the steps, and placed her hand on the Bible. "I do," she affirmed clearly when asked to swear the truth. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Danton, approached. "Lyric, please tell the court what occurred on night of October 12th. Lyric drew a steady breath, her gaze sweeping the gallery until it found Colonel Ronan Thorne in the front row. He offered a subtle nod. Silent strength transferred across the distance. "I went to the store to purchase medicine for my mother. Cassian followed me. He cornered me. He told me my family didn't belong here, that I was trash." She paused, allowing the words to resonate. "He emptied a garbage can over my head, but the garbage itself wasn't the worst of it. The worst was his expression. He wasn't angry. He was enjoying it. He believed he was entitled to humiliate me because he had money and influence, because his uncle controlled the school, and my father was merely a soldier." Miss Danton nodded. "And how do you feel about him now, Lyric? Do you hate him?" Lyric turned her head and for the first time looked directly at Cassian. He flinched, unable to hold his gaze. "I don't hate him," she answered, the statement rippling through the room like an unexpected wave. "Hate requires energy. Hate requires respect for the enemy. I have neither for him. I pity him." She faced the jury again, locking eyes with an elderly woman in the front row. "My father taught me that true worth is measured by how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Cassian Vanderbilt has been given everything, yet he remains empty. He tried to strip my dignity to fill that void, but he failed. Dignity cannot be washed away with filth. It lives in the bone. I ask this court not for revenge, but for accountability. Without consequences, he will never grow into a man. He will remain a dangerous boy." A low murmur swept the courtroom. Judge Hawthorne banged his gavel, restoring order, but the impact was irreversible. Lyric had not portrayed herself as a victim. She had claimed moral high ground, dismantling Cassian's power simply by refusing to be defined by his cruelty.
The trial proceeded swiftly after that, the evidence overwhelming, the assault video, FBI exposed financial records, testimonies from former students. It was a landslide. The county courthouse stood as an imposing fortress of limestone and oak, erected in an era when justice was regarded as a solemn, almost sacred obligation. Inside Courtroom B, the atmosphere hung thick with the scent of fresh floor wax and the sharp, unmistakable tang of nervous perspiration rising from those who knew guilt all too well.
2 hours later, the jury filed back in, their expressions unreadable. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Cassian Vanderbilt rose unsteadily, legs trembling so violently he had to brace himself against the table for support. "Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?" Judge Hawthorne asked, voice steady as bedrock. The foreman, a retired mechanic with hands roughened by decades of honest labor, stood without glancing at Cassian, fixing his gaze solely on the bench. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of second-degree assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the hate crime enhancement, we find the defendant guilty." Mrs. Vanderbilt let out a choked, anguished sob. Cassian's face drained of color, leaving him ghostly pale. Judge Hawthorne nodded once, shuffling his papers, before peering over his glasses at the boy before him. "Cassian Vanderbilt remains standing for sentencing." Cassian shuffled forward, barely able to stay upright. "I have heard your attorney speak of pressure," the judge said, his voice grinding like stone on stone. "I have heard excuses rooted in upbringing and expectation. I am not moved. This court sees individuals every day who possess nothing yet retain their humanity. You possessed everything and chose cruelty." The judge leaned forward slightly, eyes unyielding. "I sentence you to 2 years incarceration." Cassian gasped, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. "However," Judge Hawthorne continued, raising a hand for silence, "considering your age and absence of prior convictions, I suspend that sentence. You will not enter prison today, but neither will you walk entirely free." He lifted a document, voice measured and final. "You are ordered to complete 1,000 hours of community service with the Department of Sanitation. This will not be office work. You will report weekends to clean streets, to collect the very garbage you once weaponized. You will learn the weight of labor and the experience of invisibility. Furthermore," Judge added, "you will attend the State Juvenile Behavioral Correction Program for 6 months. No phones, no luxuries. You will rise at 5 each morning, work and undergo intensive empathy training. Fail a single day and the suspended prison term activates without delay." Finally, he gestured to the podium at the room's center, microphone waiting. "One matter remains, the victim. This court orders a public apology, here and now." For a narcissist like Cassian, prison had been a distant terror. Public humiliation was annihilation. He glanced desperately at Sterling, who averted his eyes. Escape was impossible. Slowly, painfully, Cassian approached the podium as local news cameras pivoted toward him, red lights blinking like accusatory stares. He gripped the wood until his knuckles whitened, scanning the gallery, veterans with hardened gazes, students he had once tormented, and Lyric Thorne, calm and unflinching. "I'm sorry," Cassian began, voice fracturing. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Lyric," he mumbled. "Louder," Judge Hawthorne commanded, "and look at her." Cassian forced his head up, tears carving tracks down his face and staining his expensive suit. "I'm sorry, Lyric," he managed, voice quavering under the weight of absolute defeat. "I was wrong. I thought I was better than you. I was weak, a coward. I'm sorry for hurting you, for insulting your family."
He bowed his head, sobs racking him openly. The golden boy's image lay irrevocably shattered. The town beheld him for what he truly was, a broken, stripped bully. Lyric watched without triumph or gloat, offering only a solemn nod of acceptance. "Court is adjourned," Judge Hawthorne declared, gavel falling like a gunshot that closed an era. Outside the courthouse, the sun dipped low, bathing the steps in warm golden light. The earlier rain had cleared, leaving the air fresh and renewed. Colonel Ronan Thorne emerged first with Lyric at his side. A spontaneous cheer arose from the gathered crowd. Veterans snapped to attention and saluted in perfect unison. Students who had once lived in fear now applauded the girl who had waged their battle for them. Lyric paused at the bottom step, looking up at her father. "We did it," she whispered. Colonel Thorne's rare, genuine smile reached his eyes as he rested a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Lyric. I merely guarded your flank." They walked toward the truck, media clamor fading behind them. The nightmare of Ashbourne Academy had ended. Corruption had been purged, the bully dethroned. As they drove away, Lyric gazed out the window at children playing freely in the park, laughter ringing clear without the old shadows. She drew from her pocket the faded photograph of her father in uniform, the one she had kept in her locker, the one Cassian had once mocked, and smoothed its creases before placing it on the dashboard. Honor had been restored, not only for her, but for every soul ever diminished. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. 18 months later, sunlight seemed to fall brighter across Ashbourne Academy's football field, as though the grounds themselves had been cleansed. The shadow of the Vanderbilt regime had finally lifted from Ashbourne Academy, giving way to an atmosphere of authentic community and hopeful new beginnings. Lyric Thorne stood at the podium, a gentle breeze tugging at her graduation gown, while the gold sash of valedictorian draped proudly across her chest. She was no longer the outsider or the victim. She had become the leader this school had so desperately needed. The new principal, a stern yet deeply fair woman who knew every student by name, stepped aside with quiet respect, yielding the stage. Lyric surveyed the sea of blue caps and gowns stretching across the field. In the front row sat the two people who meant everything to her. Colonel Ronan Thorne maintained his impeccable posture, dress uniform gleaming under the afternoon sun, yet his gaze held none of the inspector's scrutiny. It overflowed with the profound, tender pride of a father witnessing his child's triumph. Beside him sat Isadora, free of the wheelchair at last, her hair returned in soft, dark curls, cheeks flushed with the radiant glow of remission and hard-won peace. She clasped the colonel's hand tightly, smiling through tears of unbridled joy. "When I first arrived in this town," Lyric began, her voice clear and resonant, carrying effortlessly across the stadium, "I was told to know my place, that worth was measured by possessions, not character." She paused, meeting the eyes of students who had once avoided her at lunch out of fear. But together we discovered the truth. Titles do not create leaders. Wealth does not confer nobility. True honor lies not in dominating others, but in the strength we extend to lift them up. Character reveals itself in unseen moments, standing for what is right even when your voice trembles. A profound silence blanketed the stadium, one born of genuine respect and shared understanding. "We're not defined by the darkness we endure," Lyric concluded, her smile warm as she looked to her parents, "but by the light we carry within us." The applause that erupted was no mere courtesy. It thundered across the field like a cleansing wave, hundreds of caps soaring into the brilliant sky in joyous celebration. As Lyric descended the stage steps, Colonel Thorne waited at the bottom. He offered no formal handshake. Instead, he enveloped her in a fierce bear hug that lifted her clear off the ground, shielding her from the world one final time. Isadora joined them, wrapping her arms around both, and they stood there bathed in sunlight, a family tempered in fire, unbreakable and victorious. The bullies had vanished, the scars had healed, justice had prevailed, and honor had been fully restored. For the Thorne family and for Ashbourne Academy, the long, bitter winter had ended at last. Spring had arrived in full bloom. Lyric Thorne's triumph stands as enduring proof that dignity is armor no bully can ever breach. Even drenched in filth, she towered above the golden boy because her worth was rooted not in bank accounts, but in the unyielding strength of her character. While Cassian Vanderbilt learned through bitter consequence that respect cannot be purchased, Colonel Ronan Thorne revealed the true essence of power, not domination through fear, but protection through love. This story affirms that when we unite against injustice, even the most entrenched corrupt empires will inevitably fall. Have you ever witnessed an underdog rise against a bully? Share your experience in the comments below. If this tale of justice served moved you, like the video, share it with someone who needs inspiration, and subscribe for more stories of courage and redemption. Remember, you are defined by the light you carry within you.